There's so many tricks with onions out there. For me, it's gonna bring tears. This is gonna be a saucy chicken. My name is Nusrat. I am from Canada originally. I've been in California for the last 17, 18 years and love food so much. That's all I think about all day, every day. We are gonna make some naan here today, and it's gonna be perfect with the chicken dish that we're gonna be cooking as well. I call that recipe wedding chicken. For the naan, it's a yeast dough. So we are going to bloom the yeast just in case, always a good insurance policy. I'm gonna mix the flour and salt, but I'm gonna put the sugar in with the yeast to start off, let it just sit for a couple minutes, put in the liquids in there, and then just pour all of that into the dough. And then as needed, we're gonna add extra flour. I'm using bread flour because I really enjoy working with bread flour when it comes to naan, because gluten is kind of the star of the show. It's gonna be bubbly and soft. So here we go. So let me grab my yeast. You know, you could do a couple of teaspoons. I am gonna go ahead and use 2 packets of this instant yeast. Just gonna toss them in here in some warm water. This is lukewarm, a little bit warmer than room temperature is fine, but of course you don't want it to be hot because that is not the friend of yeast. And this is gonna be plenty of yeast to give rise to all of this flour that we're gonna have in the dough, plus some. So let me just whisk that so I don't have yeast lumps. And yeast loves to eat sugar, so we're gonna put some of that in. And I wouldn't call this a sweet dough, but you can have a range of sugar that you add. And in fact, every time I make naan, I make it a little bit differently. So I'm just gonna give that maybe a couple minutes to dissolve. And that's kind of one rule of thumb with yeast for me, is when you're using the instant yeast, you don't really need to bloom it. You can just throw it directly into your dry ingredients and make your dough from there. But if you're questioning, is this the kind of yeast that you bloom or don't bloom, just put it in water and then you don't have to worry about it. And in fact, I have done it the wrong way, and the only negative consequences are that you have little bumpy things in your dough, which is neither here nor there, but just aesthetics wise, you kind of see an uneven texture that way. So I'm gonna give this like 3-4 minutes and then go from there. So the ingredients in my naan, and this can, depending on how rich you want your dough to be, I like to put either some butter, or in this case I'm putting olive oil. If you want it to be vegan, you can do that by cutting out the dairy and just having, you know, olive oil. I like the addition of the yogurt because it gives it a little bit of a depth of flavor, and the milk just makes it a little bit richer than just plain water. I can put the salt in while we're waiting, and you can just give this a little bit of a mix so that the yeast is not hitting a pocket of salt right away. Nothing bad will happen, but you know what they say about salt, it's kind of inhibits the growth of yeast. So I can see some bubbling action with my yeast here, some bubbles in the middle, and then those little grains are, you know, softening and dissolving. So I'm gonna go ahead and put all the liquids into here just so that it's uniform, and then pour it into my flour. So here we go with the yogurt. Pour that milk right in there. Give it a bit of a stir. So here we go. May the dough gods be with us. So all the liquids are in, and I start with adding probably a little bit more liquid than I need, because you don't want to go the other way where you have too much flour and then you're adding liquid for this dough anyway. And so I am just working in the flour into the dough because I don't want any dry pockets of flour. And then if you want to, you can also turn it out onto the bench, give it some slap and folds. With this kind of dough, if I'm using a mixer, I might knead it for 5 minutes, which is plenty in my opinion for this. Because we're working with bread flour, it's the gluten development I feel like is very superior than when it comes to like using all-purpose flour. You can see it's pretty wet, but it has structure. Bread flour is not as thirsty as something like whole wheat or, spelt flour. I'm just gonna put it on here, work it a little bit, and then if it's sticking to your hands, you can always wet your hands a little bit. This slap and fold immediately triggers the gluten to do its thing. You can see the strands of it almost. Smooth as a baby's butt already. Look at this. And there's our dough. So we want to let the dough rest. Doubling in volume is going to be a great indicator for when it's ready. On a hot day, that could take a half an hour. And we put 2 packets of yeast in here, so I'm thinking it's not going to take much longer than 30 minutes. And we'll be back to divide this up, shape it, and then we'll pop it in the Simply Red oven. All right, so our naan dough has been resting for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and it is definitely ready to shape. Check this out. Check that wobble. All right, so it is nice and fermented. Usually I just grab portions and shape it. Let me get a little bit of flour for dusting. And I'm just gonna grab pieces of it because I can feel with my hands how big they are so that they come out evenly. And shaping it like this, it does degas it, but it's going to be plenty bubbly. These are the size. It's in between a golf ball and a tennis ball. You can always kind of like adjust it a little bit if you have ones that are a little bit too big or too small. I'm using the palm of my hand to create tension. This is how my mom shapes the bread, so that's how I learned it, and it works really well. When I do this, you can see that it kind of tucks it all under like that. And these are gonna go ahead and rest once they're divided for just a few minutes. You don't have to rest it for long. Our dough for the naan is rising, and we can do our mise en place and get our spices ready and other vegetables for our chicken dish. My go-to spices for this recipe, which I call wedding chicken, is salt, cayenne or Kashmiri red chili pepper, which I'm going to use today, turmeric, and then I have a really cool spice blend, which is called simply chicken spice. I got it on a trip to Jerusalem, and it's really magical, and I can't buy it here locally, so I attempted to make my own. So I'm going to do a half and half mix of my own version of it, as well as the chicken spice. I also have some garam masala, which is homemade. I made it last night. And it's just a combination of a few dried whole spices that you toast, like whole black pepper, cumin seeds, coriander, and a couple of other things. You just toast it in a dry frying pan on the stovetop. And once it's cool, you blend it together. Every family has their own recipe. So, all right, so we're gonna get started doing our mise en place with our spices. I'll start with the salt. The thing with salt is you can always put more in, but you can't take it out. This is about 1.5 teaspoons. I actually really like to put finishing flake salt on everything I eat, so that's a way to go too. So I'm gonna go with the pepper next, which is my Kashmiri red chili. It's a nice vibrant color. That's why I like to use this as opposed to cayenne pepper. Depending on the spicy level, tolerance level, you wanna adjust this, but it tends to be not as spicy. So I'm gonna just go for it. That's about a teaspoon. Here is some cumin powder. I'm gonna go equal amounts with everything, and with the chicken spice, I'm gonna just go crazy. Garam masala is pretty potent, so I will go about an equal amount of that. Here is my chicken spice. So there's 1 tablespoon. And then I'm gonna do 1 tablespoon of my version of my chicken spice that I tried to approximate. It's gonna make it really delicious. And paprika adds a nice smoky sort of flavor. So In my opinion, this is really a fusion of the food that I grew up with along with Mediterranean food that I've enjoyed in my life. I think if there was any food that was going to win, Mediterranean food wins. It's just so delicious. A little bit of paprika there, and then turmeric. And the turmeric, you know, it does have a bit of a flavor, but if anything, it gives you a really vibrant, beautiful color in the final dish. So there is our mise en place with our spices. Now we're gonna chop up all the vegetables that we need and the aromatics. So I've got a really beautiful red bell pepper here. This is the biggest red pepper. It's as big as my head. Biggest one I've ever seen. And then some tomatoes. Of course, onion. You could use brown onion, any kind of onion. I kind of like the theme of the red onion along with Mediterranean food. We've got some fresh ginger and garlic. So I like to peel and mince the garlic myself. So I am going to throw in at least 6 to 8 cloves of garlic. A bit of garlic never hurt anyone. And we're gonna do maybe 2 inches. So peeling the ginger, I know different schools of thought on how to do that. I like to just peel it like this. I know with a spoon you can just scrape it. And you know what? What would happen if you didn't peel it? Nothing. It would be fine. And I'm gonna go ahead and mince the garlic and ginger together because they're gonna go into the dish at the same time. You find like a craggy bit here, you can just get at that. Just show it who's boss. All right, so we have our ginger peeled. We're gonna peel some garlic. There's really no wrong way to peel it. So what I do is just cut the tips off, and I'm wearing some gloves because that's a good way to not have to worry about how to get the smell of garlic off your hands. And then when I give it a smash, then the peel just comes right off super easily. So there we go. So I'm just gonna go through the process of peeling all my garlic. I think mashing the garlic like this as you peel it also kind of releases its magic powers a little bit. All right, I'm just gonna give these a good mince and set it aside. All right, that might seem like a lot of garlic and ginger, but it's really not because we are cooking 2 pounds of chicken, because if you're going to all this trouble, might as well have a good quantity. So this is the kind of texture I'm looking for right here. So I still have a few big chunks. I'm just gonna run through until it's pretty much even. If you want to use a mortar and pestle for this part, that is also something that works well, and then you're getting it into a paste. If I get a store-bought ginger garlic paste, which I did not too long ago, what I found that it has a very fine texture, and there might be a little bit of something in there that affects the flavor. So when it comes right down to it, I really do prefer doing it this way, but if you want to have a jar of ginger garlic paste ready in the fridge, it cuts down maybe like 10 minutes off your process. I'm gonna just throw a little bit of salt on there to add some grit. And then it doesn't fight me when I do this. You might think using a food processor could cut down on time, and if you have like a cute tiny one, that would be a great way to save time as well. For me, it's just another thing to wash with tiny little fiddly bits. I love this dish because it's a bit of a fusion between the kind of flavors that I grew up with. All right, so let's do the onion. And there's so many tricks with onions out there in terms of, oh, how not to cry and all of that. And for me, it's gonna bring tears. So what I like to do is just kind of cut it in half and then trim off the tip, and then it's super easy to peel that way. If I'm gonna be mincing it finely, chopping it finely, I just leave the root end on, and that kind of holds it together for you while you're cutting. So then there's no wrong way to do this also, but I like to just kind of run through a little bit like this. Slice through it. Medium fine sort of a dice is going to be just perfect. You won't be able to tell one vegetable from another in the sauce. It's just going to be part of this sauce. And then when you slice through, that root is holding onto the onion for you. It's like your little friend. All right, let's see here. I'm just gonna go like this. Aromatics and veggies ready ahead of time is helpful, time saver, and do the pepper. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is not exactly a julienne, but I'm gonna do fairly thin strips because I want it to kind of blend into the sauce. I'm gonna do this first. Thin strips. Growing up, my mom would make food from scratch 3 times a day. She's making naan 3 times a day, fresh. She might make the dough in the morning and then have that dough for the other 2 meals of the day. She is really good at making food, and so that's kind of what I grew up watching. You know, it kind of is about food from your childhood and trying to recreate it. So for my sauce, I want them to be maximum maybe this big. The tomatoes and the peppers are going to go into the pot when the chicken is cooking at the same time. So it's fine with the mise en place if those are together. So with the tomatoes, I'm taking out the belly buttons. And, you know, rough chop is fine. Okay. So we have all our spices ready, our vegetables and aromatics for the sauce. All we need is the chicken, and we are gonna go ahead and get that cooking. Our dough balls have rested. We've transferred them to the mat here, and they are ready to be dimpled and final shaped. I'm using a little bit of flour. You don't need too much. And I'm gonna do like so. That spreads it out. What I like to do is maintain the bubbles inside and just dimple it like this. So let me do this, and then I'm gonna stretch it a little bit more so that they are not blobs. I'm gonna just treat it like a Frisbee, stretch it out. The edges are a little bit thick. I don't want it really thin. I don't want this to be crispy, but I want it to be evenly kind of stretched out. And the longer you let it rest, the easier it will be to stretch it out. That's about the size that I want it to be. Smaller than a dinner plate. I'm just looking for the thick parts to even those out. If you tear it, you get a hole in it. It's the shape of Texas, no worries. There is a little bit of sugar in this dough, so that's going to promote caramelization when it's baking. And hopefully it will get a beautiful color. So these are ready to throw in the oven. Okay, I'm going to throw these in a 425 oven. We're going to check back in just a few minutes and see how they're doing. The naan has been baking, and we are ready to pull it out of the oven. So these naan took 5 to 7 minutes in a 425 oven. It was vented, and as you can see, the underside is perfect. Some of these are domed, which is totally fine. And we are ready, and we are gonna slather this with some garlic butter and enjoy it with our chicken dish. So what we're gonna do is start by sauteing the onions. I'm going to turn the stove on to medium-high heat and get the onions started in some olive oil. I'm going to drizzle in a couple tablespoons of olive oil. You can go more or less based on your preference. Okay, that's about 3 tablespoons. And we're gonna just cook that, saute it until it's starting to brown. We don't need this to caramelize, but we do want to have it be past translucent, so when it's starting to get light brown. You don't have to stir this constantly, just occasionally is fine, but don't walk away. Stay close by. We're going to be cooking 2 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken thighs. You could use breast, but I find thighs are nicer to work with because they stay moist and it's really difficult to overcook them. I've got this on high heat right now just to get it going. Then I'm going to turn it down to medium-high and let it go for just a few minutes. This will generously feed 4 people. It's been 3 or 4 minutes. I've got a few edges turning a little bit of caramelized color. All right, I'm gonna call that good and start putting in these other ingredients here. So I'm gonna start with garlic and ginger. That's minced finely. Give your garlic and ginger 15 to 30 seconds in the heat. And then we can add in our spices that we laid out already. And let that come together with the heat. All right, now the spices are gonna burn pretty easily. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and throw in the chicken and let it get a little bit of heat. So these are bigger pieces. If you prefer to have smaller pieces of chicken, that's perfectly all right as well. Adding spices to I like to add the spices into the sauteed onion and aromatics because with the oil and the heat, those spices kind of bloom in terms of the flavor coming out, the oil's being released. I am not looking to get any type of color on the chicken. I'm just kind of evenly coating it with the masala. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in the tomato paste. All in. I just don't want any pasty lumps of tomato paste, so I'm just stirring it around a little bit just to get it distributed evenly. And as it's simmering, everything is gonna even out and spread out. I'm just gonna turn the heat up as I'm adding the last ingredients so that it can come up to a simmer. So I'm just gonna stir these around. And even though it looks dry right now, the tomatoes and the peppers and the chicken itself is going to release a lot of liquid. So it will get very saucy on its own. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover this up. And I'll probably just wait 30 seconds to a minute and then turn the heat down to medium-low and allow it to simmer. I will come back and check it from time to time because you don't want it to scorch and burn on the bottom. So anything that's sturdy and has a heavy bottom is ideal for something like this that's gonna cook for a long time on the stove. So now we're gonna just let it simmer and check back from time to time and give it a stir. Ready to make our garlic butter, and we're gonna drizzle that over our fresh, beautiful naan that we just baked in the oven. And it's a fairly simple list. I'm gonna start with the butter and place that into a small pot. I am gonna melt this beautiful butter with 2 cloves of minced garlic. I'm not gonna cook the garlic, saute the garlic. I just wanna warm it up and take the raw edge off of it. Once the butter is nicely melted and the garlic is warmed up, I will take it off the heat, give it a stir, throw in some cilantro to make it look fresh and beautiful, and it's ready to drizzle on our naan. Doesn't take long at all. Just as soon as it's melted and having a little bit of a sizzle, signaling that the garlic is heated through, I'll take it off. You could make something similar with olive oil as well if you want to go for a vegan option. That would be rich and wonderful as well. I've let this heat until I get a little bit of foaming on top, and I'm going to call that good. So the garlic butter is ready to drizzle over our naan. Our chicken is ready. It's been simmering for 30 minutes on very low heat. We're gonna plate that up, drizzle our naan with some beautiful garlic butter and cilantro, and dig in. When you talk about fusion, it is a beautiful combination of typical Indian Pakistani spices with the Mediterranean twist. I feel like the red pepper, especially in that chicken spice, adds just another level of depth and something unique and different. You can certainly serve this with rice. It would be really, really nice with basmati rice. And then, in my opinion, lemon juice, a little squeeze of lemon goes a long way. So what I'm gonna do is get the naan ready first. Just put in a little bit of cilantro. It's just a little swimming pool for the butter right here. And here we have our garlic butter naan served alongside wedding chicken. And I'm gonna just finish this with a little salt. All right, let's do a crumb reveal. Okay, it's gonna be delicious. So good. Really good. You gotta try this. Make your naan, bake it in the oven, cook the chicken. Don't cook the chicken, just eat the naan.